Today, we're talking Devy with someone much smarter than myself on the topic. Stay tuned because the Devy is in the details. Next. Welcome into the double FU, the FU times 2, the fantasy football universe. I am Jeremy Shulman at FF_Rebel, and today we are joined by the one and only Kevin Coleman at theboys_22. I can only assume that's Emmett Smith reference on Twitter. He's at the Devy Royale on YouTube and soon to be everywhere else, if not already everywhere else. Just a quick matter of intro here. As a leading Devy voice in the space, Kevin is the recipient of the first annual Tags Rising Star Award in honor of the late, great Mike Tagliere, of course. He's a teacher in his spare time and, molding young minds of this generation. And he's got Xavier Worthy listed in his Twitter bio. So I think we're going to be good friends, especially since I can see he's a Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant fan. So, Kevin, welcome in. The warmest and sincerest of double FUs to you. And thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Yeah, man, appreciate having on. Anytime I can chat with, Devy enthusiasts or just people who like this format and kind of maybe introduce the format too, because it can be a little challenging, it can be fun, but just kind of give like how to do it, what to do, the do's and don'ts. As someone who's done a lot of don'ts, not perfect by any means, but I appreciate you, jumping on. I appreciate you the Tags Award. That was that's kind of my thing. Tags was a really good guy. He was someone I really looked up to. Pat Fitzmaurice is another one that I really look up to, and I really appreciate you mentioning him because we can never forget Tags. He was one of the best out there.
Yeah, listen, Tags was, didn't know him at all, unfortunately, but he was the guy that I routinely listened to day in and day out that actually got me thinking, wow, this guy's really good. If I could be like this guy one day, that would be amazing. And he was my go-to for all sorts of analysis, tragedy, obviously, but left an indelible mark in the industry. So, I think that Tags Award is something certainly to be proud of. Obviously, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, but it's definitely, a high point of the industry, and you're definitely well deserving from what I've seen. So, we're going to jump in here real quick, and we're going to talk a little bit about Devy. In terms of the format, maybe you can just give kind of briefly a beginner's guide. What is Devy, and how does it work? How does it operate? And what can you expect if you join your first ever Devy League?
Yeah, so very basic. Devy just short for developmental. Scott Fish actually created it a long time ago. Shout out Scott Fish, and he was one of the first to kind of do this. And all it is you draft college players in your fantasy draft. So it's not like college fantasy, which can be overwhelming. Even Campus Canton is a very it's a hard format where you're having to like manage a team on the other side. It's a very simple format where you draft your dynasty team, and then you usually have another draft. So you have another draft, 1 round to 5 or however deep you want it. And you just draft college players based on however you did your draft picks. You could do Kentucky Derby. You could have preset before your dynasty draft. You could do alternate. So usually guys will do hey, you got the 101 in the dynasty draft, and you're going to get the 112 in the Devy draft. It just really depends on how you all set that up. But then you just draft college players, and you really can keep it simple. I always say simple is better when you do this format for the first time. 1 round. Hey, let's just add 1 round of a Devy draft, and then you go out there and draft like Luther Burden from Missouri or Travion Henderson from Ohio State, and then you just have them as assets, right? And then that's where you get to trade, you get to have fun with them, you get to kind of see how they do in college, and just little things. Now it can get deeper, it can get really hard. You could draft high school kids, it gets really degenerate. But very basic Devy is you just get to draft other college kids, and the biggest thing that I think is the thing I love about the format the most is that it just adds more trading in your leagues because you can trade college assets, and it really vamps up trading. In all my Devy leagues, we have a lot more trading than in dynasty leagues. And then the other thing too, it's just fun. It just adds more drafting, which guys like. I love the draft, so it's fun to draft more and have those drafts there. So that's the simple part of it. Essentially, you just have drafts. You draft college guys. They're your assets. You can trade them. And if you don't trade them, they come on your team. So if you drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. 2 years ago, now you get Marvin Harrison on your roster. And so it's a lot of little fun to build and have a different area to build a dynasty team.
Yeah, for sure. And as someone who is just right now in his fourth Devy league in a startup that just began, I'm definitely going to be taking notes for the rest of this session here. Kevin, as I mentioned at the top, is a teacher, so just consider me your student here. But if we go a tiny bit deeper, and we'll get there throughout the course of the episode, but a tiny bit deeper in terms of strategy as compared to a standard dynasty league, what are you looking at kind of in the startup throughout the course of maybe season 1, season 2, as these Devy players develop and eventually hit your roster?
So, I always advocate this. So the big one thing I always advocate for Devy is not to overdraft quarterbacks. So if you're in a league and you're in a startup dynasty league, always try to solidify your quarterback room early. And I'm in that in dynasty anyway. So when I talk about dynasty strategy, it's the same thing. I want 2 top 12 guys. If I got to trade up, I'm going to get 2 top 12 guys or projected top 12, right? Kyler Murray is a good example of guy sitting at QB 13, 14 right now that could have an upside of top 5 guys. So if I can get Kyler plus another asset, Anthony Richardson or Lamar or Joe Burrow or one of those guys, I want to shore up that quarterback room, because in Devy, what you used to have, you don't have it as much, but what you used to have is guys really attacking the quarterback position early. So DJU 101 a few years ago. Now DJU is on his 3rd college football team playing out in Florida State now. And so really the number one thing I say is that Devy is really predicated on what dynasty trends are going. And right now the trend is wide receiver heavy. Like everything's wide receiver. That's where the value is at. So the way I look at it there is like, well, yeah, exactly. So if you want to keep your value, like freshman wide receivers are going to hold more value than probably sophomore running backs or even junior running backs. So I really aggressively target the wide receiver position early. And there's always, when you're looking at a Devy draft and you're going into it, there's always outliers, right? So like a quarterback I really like is Nico. I always mess up his last name, but Nico from Tennessee, quarterback out there. Nico, he is my like, okay, I'm willing to take a risk on Nico. Like, but it hurt. Like last year, I was telling guys, like, I would draft Drake May, I would draft Caleb Williams, and I would draft Drew Aller. And well, Drew Aller hasn't panned out yet. And so there's still risk with the quarterback position. This year, for me, when I'm looking at just my rankings overall, like I'm comfortable drafting Beck, maybe. I like Nico, right? And then you're kind of looking at after that, it's like, all right, who's that next guy that you'd be? Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma. Like even then, you know that there's inherent risk there. Where more for me going into drafts now, it's like value-wise, wide receivers. And the other thing that I want to mention when you draft this, a lot of guys newer to format, they think that who they draft on their Devy team is automatically just, you're going to keep them and they're going to go to your dynasty team. The thing that I always try to tell people is your number one job is to win your dynasty league. So use your Devy team as a true trade value pieces and try to get as much value as you can and move those guys for win now guys. Like go get you shouldn't build through the Devy spot. Build through your dynasty team. Go get, a Jeremiah Smith. He's a wide receiver going to Ohio State. Everybody loves Jeremiah. He's going 104, a freshman. Draft him, but just know, like, you could get a murderer's ransom for this kid probably in the middle of the year and really go win your dynasty side. Yeah, you're going to lose out on him in 3 years, but 3 years is a long time. Look at Keyshawn Butte from LSU. Look at these guys that were going at first. So move them, like move those guys, get as much value as you can. Don't reach in the quarterback position. Running backs, don't reach there either, because you see what's going on in the NFL right now. The value of running backs are all across the board. There are guys in the 4th or 5th round that you can grab. So like really I build through wide receiver position, just like in Dynasty. I just look for it and I try to collect the value. And then I move a lot of guys. I trade a lot of guys in Devy.
Awesome. I love that first note that you had about quarterbacks. Getting them in your startup. We're through 2 rounds, and I have Joe Burrow and Jordan Love. So I'm going to go ahead and take that as a W. And then, when you're talking about wide receiver, these are the trends that I think I'm seeing as well. Right now, it looks like at least the top 3, if not top, you mentioned Smith at 4, maybe even top 5 are all wide receivers. Where do you value kind of these running backs? As Ali Gordon is a huge name, Ashton Genty, right? Some of these guys are massive names right now. Are they back end first Devy picks in the startup, or are you looking to even push them further down?
So gross, Jeremy. It's so gross out there at the running back spot
Yeah.
because it's hard because, when I'm going through on our Patreon, we have consensus ranking. So we rank everybody. We have combined Devy Dynasty to value your actual dynasty compared to Devy as well, and trade value too. And so going through it right now, looking at it, we have Travion Henderson at 105. That at best, 105, and Quinshon Judkins 106. So we value them there. But when I'm on the clock, it's really hard for me to click that button because I know how deep, how volatile the running back position is, right? So really what I look at, and this is how I would value it, if I fall out of the Burden McMillan or Jeremiah Smith tier, if I fall out of those three guys, I'm trading back, or I'm trying to get back and collecting assets because I feel more comfortable drafting Travion at 112 than I would at 104. Even though we value him there because his upside could be 104, I think the risk there is tough, right? And then there's other guys late you can grab. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, another wide receiver that had a down year last year, but analytically, he was a top 2 guy in the class last year, the guys that came out. Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan. Again, positional, tight end premium, those type of guys. Isaiah Bond could have a breakout year. I'd rather take the risk on those guys breaking out than the risk on Travion Henderson not testing well at the combine. And then you're now I got a day 3 back on my roster. What am I doing with this guy? Zach Evans, for example. I love Zach Evans. I bought into Zach Evans early when he was a freshman, and then he turned into what? He's getting replaced by Blake Corum now. And so that's the hard part. And so if I'm in that range, really after 103, if I'm sitting there and looking at it, and I know I just said don't draft quarterbacks, but Nico's sitting there and I can't move back, that's the type of kid I'm willing to, the tools and hey, I'm going to go grab Nico at 104. Okay, I'm going to see if I can go get this quarterback. And then in the second and third, you just collect value and you're just trying to get those wide receivers that fall. But yeah, it's tough after that 103. There's a big tier. There's a giant tier there. Because even guys like Evan Stewart from Oregon, I love Evan Stewart. He has had terrible quarterback play. So everybody out there have watched him. His stats aren't there. And he just didn't have Connor Weekman was just injured all the time. But the problem is I'm hearing rumors that Tez Johnson is better than him in camp. And Tez Johnson's 145 pounds, and he's getting first-round buzz, and Evan Stewart's not. And it's man, do I want to spend a 106 pick on him, or do I spend it on Micah Hudson? He's a Texas Tech wide receiver, freshman, really good, injury-ish. I don't know what's going on there, but he's going to hold value more than Stewart, because if Stewart goes back to school next year, he's going to drop in value, but Hudson's not. So you have to take those things into account too a little bit. You have to look and say, okay, where are the landmines, the value landmines? And that's really, it's not about the player, how good they are in college. I think that's one mistake that guys miss a lot. It's oh, this guy killed it at, Penn State. Well, okay, but is he really project to the NFL? How does that look? And if he's going to take a value drop, I don't want to draft that guy, because really, I look at my team's dynasty to Devy. I'm going dynasty side. I'm going to try to win this here. I don't build through the Devy side. So that's kind of how I approach these guys. So if I could trade back and get as much value as I can, that's definitely an option for me after those first 3 guys.
I'm going to have to rewatch this a number of times. That was just a wealth of knowledge dropped on me. I totally appreciate this. And from my experience, shout out to the Dynasty Lounge. I'm tapped in a little bit with Joe O'Leary and a bunch of guys who talk ball over there all the time. I'm tapped in, obviously, here through the FFU with SC Romero. So really those guys, and I was saying earlier, right before we came on, and your Devy Royale channel on YouTube, that's really the source of my information. And I'm just trying to cobble it together. I've heard the name Micah Hudson, but I can't watch college football over here in Amsterdam. I mean, I certainly could if I got the package, but I think my wife would kill me, because as it is, I'm staying up 3 times a week until 4 a.m., in season and watching the games and taking notes and coming on and doing the content. So, it's just not, it's not a winning scenario for me to also dive into college football, at least from watching it. But I've gotten into the tape, and some of these rookies are interesting too. I do want to talk about a few of these rookies from your perspective, but before we do, let's stick with Devy real quick. We mentioned a lot of guys in the first round of Devy startups, but who are a couple of sleepers that you have on your mind in terms of, second, third, fourth round, some guys who are going maybe either undervalued or completely unnoticed that you think could have a big 2024 and just skyrocket up the ranks?
Yeah, you know what? I'll give you a couple at each position. Does that work? Does that kind of go in there?
Absolutely.
Minnesota running back Darius Taylor is a guy that I think people need to know. I mean, I know I don't love taking running backs, but he was really, really good last year for Minnesota before he got injured. And that beginning of the year, he really came out. He had 799 yards and 5 touchdowns. Really fits that mold of that running back type that you like. 3-down kid, 5'11", like 2. And I think he's up now, based on the Minnesota's website. And he's kind of going that fourth-ish range, fifth, kind of later. You're going to see guys that kind of go ahead of him, like Donovan Edwards, based on like name value, because he goes to Michigan. He's on the cover of the college football. He kind of had that big year, big playoff. But like Darius Taylor to me is a better pick because the upside, I know he's a sophomore coming in. Very, very high volume offense out there in Minnesota from a running back standpoint. So he's a guy they're definitely keep your eye on as you go. Jonah Coleman from Washington. He transferred from Arizona. He was a 3-star kid coming out of high school. He looks really good in terms of being that 3-down back too. So that's a name to kind of watch out there. And if you want to go a little deeper, a guy that I think that, is one of those guys that could definitely like pop off this year when going through the rankings. And he's a guy that used to know. Jarquez Hunter from Auburn. Last year, he was getting a little love. Hunter was getting a little love last year. And then he got off-field issues, whatever happened there. And then coming back, like, no one's ahead of him. Like, when you're looking at Damari Alston's out there, he's their backup. But really, Hunter's their guy. And Hunter in that offense and what they're going to do with that running back, spot in Auburn, he's gonna have over 1,000 yards rushing if he stays healthy. And he's a 3-down guy. He probably profiles as one of the better receiving backs, him and Travion Henderson and those guys. But to me, Hunter got like this weird value downgrade when he actually had the best year of his career last year. He just didn't have those big games where you're like, oh my gosh, what was a kid? But, career highs in rushing yards, I believe average touchdowns. So Hunter is another guy from a running back standpoint, I think is a guy you should probably look at because he's getting valued in that 5th round range. I think that's a little low.
Awesome. I'm falling into all the luck here. I have Jarquez Hunter at least one, maybe 2 shares in my 4 leagues because I think I got in when his value was high and then completely dropped off. So we'll see if it comes back around. That works out for me. I love that. In terms of the 2024 season in college football, we just watched Washington kind of go all the way and then all of a sudden lose all of their offensive pieces, head coach, offensive coordinator. Michigan, pretty much the same scenario. What are you looking at in 2020, I guess the 2024-2025 season here for college football? Which teams do you think are going to be at the top? And especially on the offensive side of the ball, who are we keeping our eyes on?
Yeah, when you're looking at the top guys, Ohio State's number one. I think that they are easily the best college football. It sucks because I'm a Michigan fan, and it makes it a little easier that Michigan won last year, so I don't have to stress. Yeah, I don't have to stress too much. I was at the Rose Bowl watching play Alabama. That was awesome. So I don't have to stress as much. But really, Ohio State is the best team in college football easily. The Achilles heel for them is their offensive line play. That is the one area where that might get them in the end because Georgia's defensive line. But from like a Devy standpoint too, like if you're thinking of like teams to follow, and even if you don't want to get deep, you don't have to. You draft Ohio State wide receivers because Ohio State wide receivers are the best in the country. Like you're looking at what they're able to do. Brandon Ennis, people don't realize this. Brandon Ennis was another sleeper I was going to give you too. Eugene Wilson from Florida. Brandon Ennis at Ohio State. He was the number 2 recruit overall last year. And then all of a sudden Carnell Tate gets loved. Jeremiah Smith gets loved. And then Brandon Ennis is like, hey, what the heck about me? Like I was the guy that they got, but he was not an early enrollee. So we got behind a little bit. Ohio State out there, Brandon Ennis is a heck of a value because that is the wide receiver room out there is absolutely loaded. And when you're looking at it, you're like, hey, who do I draft here? Any of them. Really, you just take your shot. Who's the best value? Right now, it's Ennis is the best value. Tate's also kind of a value in that room as well. So Ohio State to me stands out offensively, one of the best in the country. The other thing is like Georgia. One area with Georgia, they're probably the second best team. I really think it's 3 teams can win a national title this year: Oregon, Georgia, or Ohio State. It really comes down to those three squads to me, as long as they all stay healthy. The thing when you're looking at Georgia players, they are extremely challenging to draft in this format because quarterback-wise, we just haven't seen it. Like we just have not. So Beck is a struggle because Georgia quarterbacks, Jake Fromm, I know they had Justin Fields, but he doesn't get credit. We can't count Justin Fields. He went to Ohio State. But Beck, Stafford, obviously a long time ago, but Beck, okay, what are we doing with him? He's got to take that next step. Georgia running backs are safe bets, but they don't really get the draft capital you love. So like Trevor Etienne, Travis's brother, is there. He's probably the only guy getting drafted in that room from like a Devy standpoint. But even then, a couple down years at Florida was okay, but he's got to break out. Like probably more of a day 3 guy right now. Don't ever draft a Georgia wide receiver. I mean, Ladd was one of those guys just kind of popped off, but they just don't throw their wide receivers the ball. Like it's just not there. But the tight end room, they got some boys right there at the tight end spot. So like Georgia tight ends, when you think of Benjamin Ursuck from Stanford, he's over there. Oscar Delp. Those are 2 top 5 Devy assets from the tight end position. And those are the guys like, hey, yeah, draft Georgia tight ends, right? And I know like you'll hear like the whole like, oh, you can't draft the helmet. Yes, you can. You 100% can in this format because Ohio State wide receivers baking their value. And really what you're looking at with Devy too is it's not so much about like drafting the helmet. It's what keeps the value, right? Well, Ohio State wide receivers keep the value. Georgia running backs will keep value because they keep buying into them. Branson Robinson was injured, but they loved him 2 years ago. Like guys that you can move off of. Georgia tight ends. Yeah, Ursuck had a down year at Stanford last year, but again, he's getting talked about as kind of being that guy. Those are the guys you target.
Yeah, love it. Iowa tight ends is really my only claim of knowledge there. USC wide receivers maybe, but yeah, absolutely.
USC wide receivers, yeah. Oregon, Oregon's building something out there, with their wide receiver room. Tez is a guy I think is a sleeper because I know he's small, but NFL scouting loved it. I mean, they have a first-round grade on him already. Like Tez is getting talked about as kind of being that sleeper. He's an older prospect. Evan Stewart is there. Running back Jordan James is out there, And then here's the other thing too. If you don't want to draft quarterbacks early, but you're sitting there and you're like in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, let's say you draft super deep. It's not a bad strategy to go after some of the older guys. Look what happened with Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. They just got first-round capital, and people wiped them off 3 years ago. I mean, it was a joke in a lot of our leagues, and like anytime we were in mocks like 2 years ago before Bo Nix went to Oregon, we give people Bo Nix as like a placeholder just for fun. Like, hey, you got Bo Nix, sucker. Yeah, you missed out. And now he is a first-round pick. So the way I look at it, like Dylan Gabriel, he's played at like 3 different schools. He was at Oklahoma last year. Now he's at Oregon. He's going to have a heck of a year. Like he's going to put up the stats. And if he leads Oregon to a national title appearance or maybe a national title, I think Dylan Gabriel is a great late round dart throw at the quarterback position because, hey, he might move up some boards in a down 25 quarterback class. So there's also that kind of strategy to look when you're looking at the Devy format.
I love it. We're going to pivot a little bit to rookies here, and we're kind of just beyond rookie season, but it's kind of always rookie season, at least until they get on the field here. We're going to hear nothing but rookies come late July when everybody kind of gets in and how they're acclimating, playbook, etc. We've already heard it. But what are you thinking in terms of, number one, who are the rookies that you're like, I got to have this guy. I love what he did in college. It's only going to come up to, and progress in the NFL. We have a ton of names here, but who are you really targeting in dynasty rookie drafts?
Oh, man. I mean, I'm a degenerate, so all my rookie drafts are over. But I will say, like, the number one guy, that definitely, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., I think – when you look at him and where he landed, I love that spot for him, right? I before I left my last company, I wrote a big old thing up on Marvin Harrison Jr. And to me, like landing spot in Arizona, targets, what they did with DeAndre Hopkins, with Kyler Murray, everything kind of laid the groundwork there. They have a very, very good running game with Drew Petzing's scheme out there to where it's a lot of play action. Now they have Benson there as well with James Conner. A lot of one-on-ones of Marvin Harrison Jr. He's going to win that every time. Like those are the things that you look for when you're thinking of Marvin Harrison. So to me, obviously that's the guy. The other guy that I have in my profile, but it's just as a joke. I was a big Xavier Worthy guy a long time ago. No, I love him. Like no. I like him. It's a joke about before the combine. I loved Xavier Worthy. I've been Xavier Worthy because he was supposed to go to Michigan. So if you guys didn't know, he freaking left. And you would have won a national title, Xavier Worthy, sucker. But he left, and he's actually out here from where I live. So I actually watched him play in high school. It was a lot of fun. So going into the year, I was like, man, this kid, he's a first-round pick. I was very high on Xavier Worthy. Then, when you're looking at it, he had another 30% career dominator rating this year. And I was like, man, people are really sleeping on this kid. And then the reason why I have him in my bio is because I really liked him. And then I got a lot of kind of pushback because I had him ranked so high. He was my wide receiver. I think he was 3 or 4 before the combine. And so I was getting pushback about that, like based on my rankings. And then he went out and ran, it was funny. Remember at the beginning, like they're like, oh, he weighed in at whatever he weighed in at. And people are like, oh, he's got to run a fast 40. Then he runs the fastest 40 time in the history of the combine. And then they go, oh, speed doesn't matter that much. And I'm like, wait a minute. No, you don't get to play both. Like, that's not what we're doing here. So, like, that's why I put him in my bio, because I was like, you don't get the double count. You don't get to use this as an example, like, and say he's got to run that. I just think, for me, when you're looking at him here, first rounder, Chiefs, has a role. I like Rashid too, but if Rashid's going to be out for an extended period of time, like I think him and Worthy can coexist. Mahomes can, especially with Kelsey still being there, it's fine. Mahomes can uplift 3 guys. He can support 3 fantasy relevant players. And to me, just upside alone, and he has the hands thing drives me crazy about the drops, because he had a broken hand one year. And that was reason, and he played through it. So part of the drops was there. And then part of the drops was because he had poor quarterback play. People can talk about Quinn Ewers however they want. Quinn Ewers was a bad quarterback last year. He was not good. And so Xavier Worthy struggled with that. And not to make excuses for him, but now he's with Patrick Mahomes. And to me, Xavier Worthy was a guy that you definitely targeted early. It's one of those reasons why I love having drafts before the combine and the draft, because I got Xavier Worthy like in the middle of second in some drafts out there. Nice. And then he was going at 108, 109. So from like a wide receiver perspective and guys that I really love, like Xavier, Marvin for sure are 2 guys that I definitely try to target there. And if, running backs, I like Trey. I think Trey Benson landed in a perfect spot for him. I think he can be running back 1 next year. After Connor leaves, or if Connor gets banged up middle of the year, Trey Benson's that guy. So those 3 guys were guys I definitely targeted in my drafts for different reasons.
Yeah, I got to talk for a second about Xavier Worthy. I've been in Dynasty for years now, 5-6 years in my Dynasty leagues. But, this year was the first year I actually dove into the tape. The first wide receiver that I watched at random, Xavier Worthy. And I dove into that tape. And I came back and I said, this guy's good. And they said, oh, you haven't watched a lot of tape yet. I said, I don't know. And the more I watched him, I noticed what you noticed. Number 1, Quinn Ewers is terrible. He struggles to hit the broadside of the barn. Like the ball's flying all over the place. Number 2, Xavier Worthy isn't just speed. He can actually run routes. I mean, it's really nice to see, I think people have this shades of John Ross trauma, from a few years back, just because he's fast, that he also can play the wide receiver position. I'm not saying he's on the level of Marvin Harrison Jr., but at the same time, he's a guy who he was my wide receiver 4 quite clearly before the draft. And then, he runs the fastest 40 of all time, and his stock actually goes down. I don't really, it went up, I think, in general, but I think in the minds of people, they're like, whoa, he's fast, but it's too fast. It's kind of like Major League. You watch it, and the guy hits a home run against the Indians, and he's like, it's too high, right? Like, it's like, what are we doing here? Like, so just absolutely ridiculous on Worthy. I think he's a value, and you should scoop him up everywhere. And then, you were mentioning some other guys. MHJ, obviously fantastic. I love Trey Benson. He was the RB1 for us as well by consensus pre-draft. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks landed in a great spot. Had he not been injured, he may have been our RB1 just with the way that he looked at Texas. We'll see how he bounces back, but he's in a great spot as well. So there's a lot of really interesting rookies there at the back end of the first round. And of course, if you can get MHJ right now, just go out and get, the Hall of Fame wide receiver's son, who's probably going to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver as early as you can. And we talked a little bit about Devy Sleepers. So let's talk a little bit about maybe some rookie sleepers that you have in mind. Anyone you're targeting in 3rd, 4th round, who do you like coming in this year to maybe see some work and rise their value?
Yeah, rookies, right? You're talking about the 2024 rookie class. Going through it, we're, just to kind of like Jacob Cowing to me. I like Jacob Cowing when he was at UTEP back in the day. He was someone that I had my eye on. I mean, last year, from an analytics perspective and just from a film, he was really good. It's just Ted McMillan was a little better. Like, obviously Ted McMillan's gonna be a 1st-round guy. So there was definitely that. And Ted played with Noah Fafita, and they kind of had that connection. But Jacob Cowing, I think, found himself a good spot. If you're looking at it from a perspective of, do you think Ayuk's going to be there, whatever's going on there, Cowing could find himself a role possibly. Now, there's what does that role look like? With them having Pearsall as well, like there's little things in there that are probably going to be there, but I do like Cowing. The other guy too, that I think that, I'll get, tight end position. I got to get a little, hold on. Let me check my rankings. I got to get a little low here. The guy Jared Wiley from Kansas City, I like him in like a deeper guy. I know we've always been searching for the next tight end of Kelsey, and it's just never come because Kelsey's a man child and he doesn't get injured. But Jared Wiley was very, very good at TCU last year. And when you watched him play, I think he had over 400 yards receiving, sure hands, kind of that red zone guy, that guy that can definitely kind of do things there. And with the Chiefs, they run a little bit of 12 personnel. Like, they're not afraid to kind of go that 12 personnel style. And Wiley, I think, is the better receiver, right? Like, Wiley can do that in terms of like the other tight ends on the roster, not Kelsey. Like, from a receiving standpoint, he definitely has that ability. And so from a tight end, I like stashing him as well. The other one that I actually wrote about, I did a video on it. Jawar Jordan is a deep guy. He's undrafted right now. I went to Louisville. I actually liked Jordan's tape more than Gerondo's tape when I had first put it on when I was doing the rookie guide. But he's at Houston now. And when you're looking at their depth chart, he actually kind of fits that system pretty well. And you got Dameon Pierce there and Joe Mixon. And people were down on Joe Mixon for the last 3 years. And then Dameon Pierce is Dameon Pierce. Jawar Jordan is a fun stash. Like, Jordan to me is like, and he's free probably on waivers right now. You could probably go grab him. He's a guy that, could possibly find a role. If the guys in front of him don't play well, they was, brought in by this coaching staff. Jordan to me is that deep Devy guy that was out there, didn't probably get drafted in Devy too much, but it can find a role. And you always look for those offenses, Houston, San Francisco, those Miami for running backs. And he found himself in one of those offenses. So I like that spot for him.
Nice. I'm just going to throw a couple names at you here. Maybe one or two that I like, or one or two that people seem to love. One is mine, Rasheen Ali. Anything good to say about Ali now in Baltimore?
Yeah, I love that spot. I almost mentioned him. Obviously, when he was healthy, he was one of the better players out there in terms of in college. 36% dominant rating when he was healthy. And you saw him have like those big games. He's older, he's 23-ish, right? But he fits, again, role. So what's that role look like? Well, he's in the Ravens now. He could possibly find that role there. I think he could be running back 3 in August. Like, hey, okay, he found his way on the depth chart. Okay, hey, we went out there, and had he not got injured, I think that he would have been fine, in terms of that. Like, he would probably got a little bit higher draft capital. So I love that pick. I think a very good spot, very good player. Kind of a 3-down guy. I think he can do that, but from a receiving standpoint, can definitely do that. So Ali to me is definitely a target that you should be targeting if you can.
Another darling of pretty much everyone. Hard to blame him. Tyrone Tracy on the New York Giants.
It's weird. I graded Tracy pretty low in my initial run through when I was going through my stuff for the rookie guide that we did. I like him. I think people will just like him more because he fell into a good spot. And I'm not saying it's not a bad thing. Like, I just talked about, like, landing spot does matter. And that's fine. It's just, I don't know. Like, I think people are sleeping on Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary was pretty good last year. I mean, and he was healthy, right? And while I don't really like Eric Gray, he's okay. He was another Devy guy. People used to like him from Tennessee a few years ago. He's fine out there. It's just, if Tyrone's going to get out there, it's probably from a wide receiver perspective, like the PPR area. I just hate the quarterback play, and I don't love this offense too much. Like, I'd be actually more in on Tracy if Drew Lock was the starting quarterback. If I knew Drew Lock was the starting quarterback, I'd probably be more in on it. With Daniel Jones, I just don't know what the upside in this offense very much. Tracy just feels like that plug-in guy, though. Like, he'll probably be around. You could plug him in there. The other guy to watch in this offense as a sleeper is Jacob Sailors. He just came over from the UFL, and he led the league in rushing. And they added him on their roster. Yep. I was kind of looking at him, and I think when you're looking at him, he might be able to push for a roster spot too. And he's more of a runner than Tracy was because he kind of converted. But that's a guy to be eye on. So I'm not as high on Tracy as some.
Sure. Last one, pick your poison. I'll give you 2 names, or you can talk about both. These are wide receiver darlings. We got Jermaine Burton in Cincinnati, and of course we have Javon Baker in New England. Do you like these guys? What are you thinking?
Not huge on Baker. I like it. I think he's a big play guy. But again, what does that offense look like? I think is my biggest concern with Alex Van Pelt out there, and what is that role? But Burton, I love in terms of the thing with Burton from a Devy perspective and just watching him play. And the biggest thing is he is a certified dog. Now, analytics going to hate that term, but he's one of those guys that, is going to find, he's not a great separator, but also he just finds the ball. Not great at, scoring touchdowns all the time, but in the red zone, this dude just catches everything. Like, there's little things that he does in his game that I think he landed with the Bengals that they can kind of elevate that. And Joe Burrow makes anybody look good. Like, Joe Burrow will definitely be able to kind of elevate his gameplay. And I like the fact that if Burton makes a name for himself and really kind of stands out this year, with Higgins more than likely moving on, Burton has a role with Joe Burrow, right? And then that's a proven commodity outside of, like, when you have Baker, I like, but a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. Offensive line still got to get fixed. Drake May, I love Drake May, but again, rookie, you're struggling. Hey, what is that going to look like in 2 years? So give me Burton ahead of both those guys. But I think Burton found himself in a perfect spot. And he's a guy that can really kind of show out, be like a Tyler Boyd type, and really kind of elevate his game. And I'm a big Burton fan.
Awesome. And then finally, in terms of individual players, rookies or Devy players still in college, do you have any particular hot takes that you think are kind of your own, or that other people would really kind of balk at if they heard you say it?
Hot takes. So, my big one is Nico is going to be QB1 next year. I think Nico can turn himself into QB1 in Devy. If he puts in the talent and he puts in the work and kind of develops in that offense. But again, that's not really a hot take, because who the hell cares who's going to be QB1 in Devy, because it's so hard. Like this, it's not like a huge hot take there. Probably, just looking at like the Devy landscape, I think the big thing that, I see there is like a guy like, I think that Jeremy Bernard from Alabama could be a first-round draft pick. He came over from Washington. He's at Alabama now. He's probably their wide receiver one. A guy like that could come up and pop up and be a first-round draft pick. Antonio Williams from Clemson could also pop off, be a slot guy, and be a first-round draft pick again after a down injury year, right? That's knocked him down a little bit. People forget there.
Sure.
And so, like, guys like that, those Ricky Pearsall, those guys that all of a sudden just pop out, hey, these are Xavier Leggett, those type of guys. I think that you have some of those guys in the 25 class too, like Antonio, Bernard, some of those guys too. And I guess another hot take I'd have is I think Jeremiah Smith is not going to be the best freshman wide receiver from a production standpoint. I think that there will be another freshman that maybe pops off from a production standpoint, just based on the room ahead of him, and that, he's still great, but I do think those other guys, it's not as big a gap as some people think.
Sure. Awesome. And then finally, just in terms of Devy, the game itself, it's certainly growing in popularity, but there's a long way to go, I'd say. What do you think about the Devy game in terms of where it stands right now and its potential future here? Like, are you seeing kind of a boom? Are you seeing, just more opportunities to play the game? How are you feeling about the future of Devy?
Yeah, I think it's fine where it's at. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's okay. It's niche, and that's okay. Like, I think that a lot of people in the space in CFF or C2C or Devy try to make it not niche, but that's not what it is, right? And even their own format, C2C is niche. Not everybody can do 45-man rosters, and they can't do both. Like you said, you can't even watch college football, right? And as a dad, I get to pick one day a week. All right, babe, I'm watching football on Sunday or Saturday. I got 3 kids. So, like, the way I look at the format in general, it's like, it's fine if you, as long as it's niche and you realize that, it's not for everybody, and you just focus on the core group that it is for, and you try to give them ways to participate. So that's why I'm very big advocate on, like, 1 round Devy. Take it slow. Do best ball only for CFF. Do power 4 only for C2C. Do, like, little things like that. Don't, like, overextend yourselves on the format. Just take it slow. And then after the first year, if you want to go bigger, go ahead, right? Like, there's always those fun formats. Like, I have a league that I started 5 years ago, and I only remember because I started when I was in the hospital, had my second daughter, and we were just sitting there, and we actually had the draft kickoff then, is we drafted college teams, and you get every player from that college team. It's a pipeline league, essentially. Nice. And we did that. And so you could always get really crazy if you like it, but just start small. Yeah. 1 round, it's totally fine. It's a fun experience. And then after a year, you're like, I don't know if I like this. That's totally okay too. And just kind of the biggest thing I say it does is it allows more trades, more activity there. And it also just is different and allows you kind of have fun with prospect film and like looking at guys and seeing if you can find those diamonds in the rough, right? It's always fun to find those Puka Nakuas early. And having them on your roster or however that works. And the big thing for us, the reason why we have our Patreon, and it's only $5 a month. You get all kinds of content. The big thing that we did is we built in our rankings. And essentially what is the hardest thing to do is how to value Luther Burden to Justin Jefferson. Like, how do you value those guys? Well, we done that for you. Like, and we have those built in where you can see like, hey, we value this guy compared to this guy, and this is what the trade value is. So we've tried to help with that because that can be a very daunting process of like, hey, what are these guys even worth in picks? And we're continuing to work on that. We're going to try to roll out a new tool in the next couple of weeks of trying to help people with that too. But that is really why we're here, like pushing, hey, do you want to try it? We'll help you, guide you. We're not perfect. We definitely make misses because the format just has misses. That's just the reality of it. But I think it's in a good spot. I think it's in a good space. And I think people enjoy it when they play. You started playing, you have some fun. I mean, those are the things that you want to try to do. And then just take it slow though. Don't jump in 20 leagues the first year. Just do one and then see if you like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Not jumping into 20 leagues is advice I wish I had a couple years ago, but appreciate it. I do have one final question. Better or more favorite social scientist, Adam Grant or Malcolm Gladwell?
Oh, so I'll go Gladwell. I like Gladwell more because I like Gladwell's like kind of sports takes too. I used to listen to him and Bill Simmons when they used to do stuff all the time back in the day when I was a kid. And they used to do all their podcasts together and talk about it in their email exchanges there. Big Gladwell fan, but I swear, like, people need to read Adam Grant's book. Think again, like they have to read this book. It changes your mindset, and even if you're an analyst or teacher or an educator, like anybody should read it, but especially if you're in some type of field when you're around people or kids or children or trying to teach people things or looking at like different scenarios and trying to learn something different. It is a masterful book.
Yeah, so good. Those two guys are always on my reading list. I love them absolutely. So was excited to see that you had some of them up there behind you. So very cool. Listen, Kevin, before we get out of here, I know you mentioned that you have the tools that you're rolling out here. Is there anything else that you want to tell the people where they can find you, how they can get access to your wealth of knowledge about Devy and everything fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few things going right now. We have the Devy Royale Substack. So if you just want kind of articles for this stuff, you could sign up there. We have our YouTube channel, which, we post a lot of Devy content on there, some Dynasty content, the Devy Royale at youtube.com, and then our Patreon. And if you sign up for our Patreon, you get everything. So for $5, you get the Substack, you get all the rankings, you get all the content written. Jay's article, Jay Stein, does a bunch of different indexes and has his analytical profile. So if you like analytics, he has his entire database of all college football players, all their analytical profiles, everything there. And it's all on our Patreon. So DevyRoyale.com/Patreon. You can find it there. If you have any questions, you can always find me on Twitter at DuBois_22 and send me a message. I opened my DMs finally. It's a dangerous place out here on X right now, but I opened them up. So if you have questions, you want to jump in, you're more than welcome to kind of jump in and ask me today.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, I really appreciate you joining us here on the Fantasy Football Universe. You can find us everywhere, fantasyfootballuniverse.com. We're on X, Twitter. We're trying to get TikTok going. We're in those streets. It's rough out there. Instagram, everywhere else you can find us. So appreciate you joining us let's see if I get this right. Kevin, there we go. I am Jeremy, and we will see you next time.